You notice disturbing pattern in how the avoidant responds to their own minimal contributions to relationship. They expect extraordinary recognition and appreciation when they provide basic relationship functions that healthy partners provide naturally without requiring praise. They send single text message after days of silence and expect you to celebrate their communication as if they have overcome monumental obstacle. They show up for one plan after canceling 5 previous plans and expect you to appreciate their presence as heroic effort rather than recognizing it as basic minimum of following through occasionally on commitments. They express one feeling after months of emotional unavailability and expect you to treat their minimal vulnerability as breakthrough deserving endless patience while they return immediately to defended distance. They provide sporadic, inconsistent presence and expect you to feel grateful for whatever scraps of attention they offer, rather than recognizing their sporadic presence as inadequate foundation for actual relationship. This expectation of special treatment for bare minimum effort reveals profound entitlement in avoidant psychology. They believe their defended limitations excuse them from normal relationship requirements. Believe their struggle with intimacy justifies providing far less than adequate partners provide. Believe you should treat their minimal occasional efforts as sufficient or even exemplary, given their attachment wounds and their defended difficulties with closeness. The special treatment demand manifests through their responses when you fail to provide the extraordinary appreciation they expect for ordinary actions. They become hurt or offended when you do not celebrate their minimal text as major communication effort. They withdraw further when you express that showing up once after multiple cancellations is inadequate rather than praiseworthy. They characterize you as demanding or unsupportive when you communicate that one emotional sharing moment does not compensate for months of unavailability. They position themselves as victim of your unreasonable expectations when actually your expectations are simply normal relationship requirements they refuse to meet consistently. The avoidant has developed sophisticated psychological framework that positions their bare minimum effort as deserving special recognition. They focus extensively on their internal struggle to provide even minimal relationship functions. They emphasize how difficult basic intimacy feels for them, given their wounds. They communicate that you should appreciate the effort involved in their small contributions, rather than assessing whether those contributions actually meet relationship needs. They suggest that expecting more from them demonstrates lack of understanding about their attachment challenges or lack of compassion for their defended limitations. This framework essentially demands you evaluate their contributions based on difficulty those contributions pose for them, rather than based on whether contributions are adequate for sustaining healthy relationship. You should celebrate that they managed to send one text given how hard communication feels for them, rather than assessing whether one text after days of silence meets legitimate relationship need for consistent contact. Yet, this special treatment demand is fundamentally unfair because it requires you to accept perpetual inadequacy while providing endless appreciation for minimal sporadic effort that never accumulates into sustainable relationship pattern. Other people maintain consistent communication, follow through on commitments reliably, express feelings regularly, provide emotional availability as baseline rather than as occasional heroic achievement. These people do not demand special recognition for meeting basic relationship requirements because they recognize these requirements are normal expectations rather than extraordinary accomplishments. The avoidant wants credit for struggling to meet requirements that others meet without struggle, wants appreciation for occasionally providing what others provide consistently, wants you to treat their defended limitations as special circumstances deserving infinite accommodation rather than recognizing those limitations make them inadequate partner regardless of the internal difficulty they experience in attempting to overcome those limitations. They expect extraordinary appreciation for doing what healthy partners do naturally. The avoidant sends you text message after several days of minimal contact or radio silence and expects enthusiastic positive response that celebrates their communication as significant effort deserving your appreciation. They have reached out despite their defended discomfort with consistent contact. They have overcome their resistance to staying engaged. They have made effort to maintain connection when their natural tendency is withdrawal. From their perspective, this single text represents meaningful effort that demonstrates they are trying and that should generate your recognition of their attempt. Yet healthy partners with secure attachment maintain consistent communication naturally without expecting praise for each message, without positioning basic contact as heroic accomplishment, without requiring recognition for doing what relationship requires. Secure partners text regularly because staying connected feels natural and desirable, rather than because they are heroically overcoming defended resistance to connection. The avoidant similarly expects extraordinary appreciation when they follow through on plans after a pattern of frequent cancellations. They show up for dinner you planned together and expect you to express gratitude for their presence, to acknowledge that showing up required effort for them, to appreciate that they chose to honor this commitment when they could have cancelled, as they have cancelled so many previous plans. From their perspective, their presence represents victory over their defended desire for space and autonomy, demonstrates they are prioritizing relationship despite their discomfort with obligation and commitment. Yet healthy partners show up for plans consistently because reliability is basic relationship requirement, because following through on commitments is minimum standard of respectful behavior, because their word means something, and cancelling plans is exception rather than pattern requiring special recognition when they occasionally honor commitments. The extraordinary appreciation expectation extends to emotional expression, where the avoidant shares one feeling or one vulnerable moment and expects you to treat this minimal emotional sharing as major breakthrough deserving endless patience while they return to defended emotional unavailability. They tell you they missed you, or they express that they have been thinking about you, and they expect this small sharing to generate your appreciation for their vulnerability, your recognition of how difficult emotional expression feels for them, your patience with their return to emotional distance after this brief moment of openness. From their perspective, any emotional sharing represents significant effort, given their defended structure that makes vulnerability feel threatening, demonstrates they are working on being more emotionally available, even if that work produces only sporadic moments rather than sustained change. Yet healthy partners express feelings regularly as natural part of intimate connection, share their internal experience because emotional sharing creates intimacy they value, communicate care and longing and connection without expecting special recognition for normal emotional expression that relationship requires. The avoidant also expects appreciation for providing basic emotional support when you are struggling, treating their minimal supportive response as extraordinary effort rather than as basic function of caring partnership. You share difficulty you are facing and they listen briefly or offer basic acknowledgement, and they expect you to appreciate their support as significant given their discomfort with emotional intensity and their defended tendency to withdraw when faced with others' feelings. From their perspective, staying present while you express difficult emotions represents meaningful effort that demonstrates their care despite their defended limitations, shows they are trying to be a supportive partner even when support requires them to tolerate discomfort. Their defenses prefer avoiding. Yet healthy partners provide emotional support naturally as basic expression of care, stay present with partner struggles because supporting person they love feels important and desired, offer consistent empathic engagement, without expecting praise for meeting fundamental relationship requirement of being emotionally available when partner needs support. The pattern reveals itself across all relationship domains where the avoidant expects special recognition for occasionally meeting basic requirements that healthy partners meet consistently without fanfare. They remember your birthday or an important date and expect effusive gratitude as if remembering significant dates represents heroic effort rather than basic caring behavior. They initiate plans occasionally and expect appreciation for their initiative, as if planning time together is extraordinary contribution rather than normal shared responsibility. They express affection sporadically and expect you to celebrate their affectionate gesture as major effort, rather than recognizing that consistent affection is basic relationship expectation. They handle conflict without immediately withdrawing once, and expect recognition for staying engaged as if occasional conflict tolerance represents growth rather than minimum requirement for functional relationship. The expectation of extraordinary appreciation for ordinary actions stems from the avoidance internal framework where they evaluate their contributions based on internal effort required rather than based on whether contributions meet relationship needs. From their internal perspective, basic relationship functions require enormous effort because their defenses resist those functions. Staying in contact feels difficult because their defended structure prefers withdrawal. Following through on plans feels challenging because commitment activates their autonomy fears. Emotional expression feels threatening because vulnerability conflicts with their defended self-protection. Providing support feels uncomfortable because others' emotions activate their own defended suppression. This internal difficulty feels real and significant to them, makes their minimal contributions feel like major accomplishments from their subjective experience of how much effort those contributions required. Yet this internal effort framework is fundamentally self-centered because it focuses entirely on their struggle, while ignoring whether their struggle-produced contributions actually meet legitimate relationship needs. Your need for consistent communication is not met by one text after days of silence, regardless of how difficult that one text felt for them to send. Your need for reliability is not met by occasional planned follow-through, regardless of how much effort overcoming their resistance to commitment required. Your need for emotional intimacy is not met by sporadic vulnerable moments, regardless of how threatening vulnerability feels to their defended structure. The relationship requirements exist independently of how difficult meeting those requirements feels to the avoidant. Their internal struggle does not change what healthy relationship needs to function. The expectation also reveals profound entitlement, where the avoidant believes their defended limitations should exempt them from normal relationship standards, while their minimal efforts to occasionally meet those standards should generate extraordinary appreciation. They want credit for struggling with what comes naturally to others, want recognition for occasionally providing what others provide consistently, want you to evaluate their contributions based on their difficulty rather than based on adequacy. This entitled framework positions you as unreasonable or demanding when you fail to provide the special appreciation they expect. If you respond neutrally to their text rather than celebrating it, if you express that showing up once does not compensate for multiple cancellations, if you communicate that one vulnerable moment does not address months of emotional unavailability, they characterize your responses as evidence. You do not appreciate their efforts or do not understand their struggle. Understanding that the avoidant expects extraordinary appreciation for doing what healthy partners do naturally allows you to recognize this expectation as entitled demand for special treatment that excuses inadequacy. You should not have to celebrate basic relationship functions as heroic achievements. You should not have to provide endless appreciation for minimal sporadic effort. You should not have to evaluate their contributions based on their internal struggle rather than based on whether contributions meet relationship needs. Healthy partners meet basic requirements consistently without expecting praise for each instance of meeting those requirements. The avoidance expectation that you should treat their bare minimum effort as deserving special recognition reveals they believe their limitations entitle them to lower standards, while their occasional attempts to meet normal standards deserve extraordinary appreciation. This entitled framework allows them to provide perpetual inadequacy while demanding you remain grateful for whatever minimal effort they occasionally offer. Showing up occasionally doesn't deserve the recognition they believe it earns. The avoidant maintains pattern of sporadic, inconsistent presence. They are engaged and available for brief period. Then they withdraw and become distant or unavailable for extended period. Then they return briefly with renewed presence before withdrawing again in repetitive cycle. During the brief moments when they show up, when they are present and engaged, they expect you to focus on and appreciate their current presence rather than addressing the pattern of inconsistency that makes their sporadic, showing up inadequate foundation for relationship. They are here now, they are making effort now, they are being present now. From their perspective, their current presence should generate your appreciation and should outweigh or compensate for their previous absence and should prevent you from expressing legitimate frustration about their unreliable pattern. The occasional showing up gets positioned by the avoidant as evidence they are trying, as demonstration they care despite their limitations, as proof relationship matters to them, even when their pattern of withdrawal suggests otherwise. When you express frustration about their inconsistency or communicate that sporadic presence is inadequate, they point to their current presence as counter-evidence. But I'm here now, I'm making effort, I'm trying, suggesting their current showing up should prevent your legitimate assessment that their pattern is problematic. They want credit for the moments they show up without accepting accountability for the extended periods when they withdraw, want you to evaluate relationship based on their best moments rather than based on their consistent pattern, want their occasional presence to excuse or compensate for their frequent absence. Yet sporadic showing up is not adequate foundation for sustainable relationship, regardless of how much effort those moments of presence require from the avoidant. Relationships require consistent, reliable presence rather than occasional sporadic engagement punctuated by extended withdrawal. Your needs for connection, for emotional intimacy, for reliable partnership do not pause during the periods when the avoidant withdraws. Those needs persist and remain unmet during absences that the avoidant's occasional returns do not compensate for. The pattern of sporadic presence creates anxiety and insecurity, rather than creating the safety and trust that consistent presence would create. You cannot build sustainable, intimate partnership with someone who shows up occasionally, then disappears repeatedly, regardless of how present they are during the brief moments when they engage. The avoidant's belief that occasional showing up deserves recognition stems from their focus on the effort required to show up rather than on the adequacy of sporadic presence for meeting relationship requirements. Showing up feels difficult for them because it requires overcoming their defended preference for withdrawal and distance. Each instance of presence represents victory over their resistance to consistent engagement, demonstrates they are fighting their defended tendencies to prioritize relationship. From their internal experience, the effort and difficulty involved in showing up makes those moments significant and worthy of recognition. They are trying so hard. They are overcoming such resistance. They deserve credit for managing to be present despite their defended discomfort with sustained connection. Yet the effort required to occasionally show up does not make sporadic presence adequate or deserving of special recognition. The difficulty they experience in maintaining consistent presence is their problem to address through therapeutic work, rather than your responsibility to accommodate through accepting sporadic engagement as sufficient. Healthy partners maintain consistent presence without experiencing it as heroic effort, requiring your appreciation. They show up reliably because being present with person they care about feels natural and important, rather than because they are heroically battling defended resistance to connection. The avoidant wants credit for struggling with what should be basic relationship function, wants recognition for occasionally achieving what others achieve consistently, wants their internal difficulty to transform inadequate sporadic presence into praiseworthy effort. The occasional showing up also typically includes the avoidant, expecting you to be immediately available and appreciative when they decide to show up, regardless of how long they have been withdrawn or unavailable. They disappear for days or weeks with minimal contact. Then they reach out expecting you to be ready to engage, to be happy they are back, to provide them the connection they are suddenly seeking after extended period of distance. From their perspective, they are showing up now, so you should respond positively to their current presence, rather than being hurt or frustrated about their previous absence. They want you to appreciate that they are here, rather than expressing legitimate feelings about their pattern of withdrawal that their current showing up does not address or resolve. This expectation that you should immediately accommodate and appreciate their sporadic showing up ignores the impact their withdrawal pattern has on you. Their absences create hurt, create anxiety about relationship status, create frustration about unreliability, create legitimate anger about their inconsistent presence. These accumulated feelings do not disappear just because they have decided to show up again. You need to express and process those feelings. Need acknowledgement of the pattern's impact. Need discussion about whether a pattern will change, rather than simply focusing on their current presence, as if presence alone erases harm their absences created. The avoidance expectation that you should immediately return to positive connection when they show up demands you suppress your legitimate feelings to protect their defended comfort, requires you to pretend the pattern is not problematic to allow them to feel good about their occasional efforts. The sporadic showing up also fails to deserve recognition because it typically does not represent genuine change in pattern or genuine commitment to consistent presence. The avoidant shows up briefly, receives whatever appreciation you provide for their presence, then withdraws again in repetitive cycle that demonstrates their showing up is temporary exception rather than sustainable shift. They are not actually committing to consistent presence. They are simply managing immediate situation by providing brief engagement that restores your patience before they retreat to defended distance again. The pattern continues unchanged despite their occasional showing up, withdrawal, brief return, withdrawal again, demonstrating that showing up occasionally is not evidence of growth or change, but rather is continuation of inadequate pattern that simply includes brief moments of presence, punctuating extended absences. Understanding that occasional showing up does not deserve the recognition the avoidant believes it earns allows you to assess relationship based on consistent pattern rather than based on occasional exceptions to pattern. Sporadic presence is not adequate foundation for relationship, regardless of effort those moments require from avoidant. Occasional showing up does not compensate for frequent withdrawal or absence. Brief engagement does not address or resolve the problems their inconsistent pattern creates. You should evaluate relationship based on what they demonstrate consistently, rather than based on their best occasional moments. Should recognize that sporadic showing up reveals they cannot or will not maintain the consistent presence relationship requires, should refuse to provide extraordinary appreciation for occasional basic presence that healthy partners provide reliably without expecting special recognition for meeting fundamental relationship requirement of showing up consistently. Their struggle with basic intimacy is not your responsibility to endlessly accommodate. The avoidant frames their defended limitations around intimacy as struggle that you should accommodate indefinitely with patience and understanding. They struggle with emotional vulnerability because of their attachment wounds. They struggle with consistent presence because closeness activates their defenses. They struggle with commitment because their childhood taught them that commitment means losing autonomy. They struggle with expressing feelings because their early experiences made emotional expression feel dangerous. This framing positions their limitations as wounds, deserving your compassion rather than as inadequacies, making them unsuitable partner. Positions their inability to meet basic relationship requirements as struggle you should accommodate rather than as deal breaker, indicating fundamental incompatibility. The struggle narrative serves specific defensive function. It generates your sympathy and your patience that prevents you from holding them accountable for inadequate behavior. It positions you as cruel or uncompassionate. If you establish consequences for their limitations rather than endlessly accommodating those limitations, it transforms the dynamic where your legitimate needs remain unmet into dynamic, where you should feel sorry for them and their difficulties rather than angry about their inadequate partnership. The struggle is real from their subjective experience. Intimacy does feel genuinely difficult for them. Vulnerability does trigger genuine defended anxiety. Commitment does activate genuine fears. Yet the reality of their struggle does not obligate you to sacrifice your needs indefinitely to accommodate limitations that make them inadequate partner. The avoidant expects you to treat their struggle as permanent condition requiring endless accommodation, rather than as problem they should address through therapeutic work. They frame struggle as explanation for why they cannot meet your needs, rather than as indication they need to do healing work to develop capacities that healthy relationships require. They want you to adjust your expectations downward to match their limited capacity rather than them doing work to expand their capacity to meet normal relationship requirements. They position their struggle as your problem to accommodate rather than as their problem to address. You should be more understanding, more patient, more accepting of their limitations rather than them being more committed to healing their wounds and developing intimacy capacities. This endless accommodation demand is fundamentally unfair because it requires you to accept perpetual inadequacy while they do no meaningful work to address the struggles they use to justify that inadequacy. Other people with attachment wounds engage in therapy, do internal work to heal their defended patterns, practice vulnerability despite discomfort, gradually expand their capacity for intimacy through committed effort to overcome their struggles. These people treat their struggles as challenges to work on rather than as permanent limitations others must accommodate. The avoidant wants the sympathy and accommodation that struggles deserve without doing the work that healing struggles requires. They want you to endlessly accept their limited capacity while they make no genuine effort to expand that capacity through therapeutic healing of the wounds creating their struggles. The struggle narrative also allows the avoidant to position your normal relationship needs as unreasonable demands given their limitations. You need consistent emotional availability. They frame this as demanding given their struggle with vulnerability. You need reliable presence. They characterize this as expecting too much given their struggle with commitment. You need them to express feelings. They position this as pressuring given their struggle with emotional expression. Your normal legitimate relationship needs get reframed as excessive expectations that fail to accommodate their struggles, making you feel guilty for having needs rather than them feeling accountable for failing to meet needs. This inverted dynamic allows them to continue inadequacy while you question whether you are being too demanding, rather than them questioning whether they are being inadequate partner. The weaponization of struggle particularly manifests when you establish boundaries or consequences for their inadequacy. You communicate that you need more consistent presence or you will leave. They respond that you are not being understanding of their struggle with closeness, that you are abandoning them for having attachment wounds, that you are being uncompassionate by requiring they meet needs that feel difficult for them given their limitations. This response positions your legitimate self-protection as cruelty, your normal standards as unreasonable demands, your boundaries as evidence you lack understanding about their struggles. The framing attempts to generate your guilt that undermines your boundaries. How can you leave someone who is genuinely struggling? How can you be so uncompassionate about their wounds? How can you demand they provide what feels genuinely difficult for them? Yet your boundaries and your standards remain legitimate regardless of their struggles. Their struggle with intimacy does not obligate you to accept relationship without intimacy. Their difficulty with vulnerability does not require you to tolerate permanent emotional unavailability. Their challenges with commitment do not mean you must accept perpetual uncertainty about relationship status. Their wounds explaining their limitations do not transform those limitations into acceptable foundation for relationship. You can have compassion for their struggles while recognizing those struggles make them inadequate partner for you, can understand their limitations stem from wounds while refusing to sacrifice your needs to accommodate wounds. They are not actively healing. The struggle narrative also often exists alongside minimal actual effort to address the struggles through therapeutic work or genuine practice. They tell you they struggle with vulnerability, yet they do not engage in therapy to heal attachment wounds, creating that struggle. They explain they have difficulty with commitment, yet they do not work with professionals to develop capacity for healthy commitment. They describe their challenges with emotional expression, yet they do not practice expressing feelings in low-stakes ways that would gradually expand their capacity. The struggle gets used as explanation and excuse without being treated as problem requiring active solution. They want you to accommodate their struggle indefinitely while they do nothing meaningful to reduce or heal that struggle. Understanding that their struggle with basic intimacy is not your responsibility to endlessly accommodate allows you to establish appropriate boundaries around their limitations. You can acknowledge their struggle is real while refusing to sacrifice your needs to accommodate struggle they are not working to heal. You can have compassion for their wounds while recognizing those wounds make them unsuitable partner, regardless of the validity of those wounds. You can understand intimacy feels difficult for them while maintaining that difficulty does not excuse them from meeting basic relationship requirements. Their struggle explains their inadequacy, but does not justify endless accommodation of that inadequacy. Healthy partners either do not struggle with basic intimacy in ways that prevent meeting relationship requirements, or they struggle but actively work to heal their struggles, rather than expecting partners to endlessly accommodate limitations without the struggling person doing meaningful healing work. The avoidant wants special treatment where you accept their perpetual inadequacy with endless patience, while they use their struggle as excuse for not meeting needs and not doing work to develop capacities that would allow meeting those needs. This demand for special accommodation is unfair and is not your responsibility to provide regardless of how real their struggle feels to them.